This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening. Good evening, Ed. Could I ask you to, Ed, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you please mute your microphone? Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Let's see, Chuck, can you do me a favor and just turn off your microphone for a second? I'm getting a little noise on the line and I'm not sure where it's coming from.
There's a caller, so that might be.
Oh, yes. Somebody who's calling in, could you just make sure that your microphone is muted, please? Thank you, Joel. All right. I received an email from John. He'll unfortunately not be joining us tonight due to illness. So our best wishes go out to John this evening. And since we have the rest of the members here, let's go ahead and gavel this meeting into order. So we've got Chuck and Joel and Marge and Debbie and Mark and myself all in attendance. Okay, so I'm gonna apologize in advance. I've just got a headache today, so my wits are probably going to be a little bit duller than usual. First order of business is the review and approval of the minutes. Have people had a chance to read them? Are there any comments? Yeah, Chuck.
I just noticed what the vice chair said last time. The template has you down as vice chair again, so the template that you changed, chair.
Okay. Yes, duly noted. Let's change that in the minutes. Joel, did you have something?
Yeah, the discussion of the heron issue, there's a few inaccuracies in that, probably just misunderstandings as Linda was trying to follow us. The biologists, where it says the biologists have been monitoring the eastern and western rookeries through a 3-year process and reporting to ODFW. That just started this year, and they haven't been reporting to ODFW. I called ODFW after the meeting and talked to Greg Reed, who's the local biologist, and ODFW did help them get started and recommended a protocol when they started the, it's just one biologist too. So I would suggest just striking the part that says through a 3-year process and reporting to ODFW.
Okay, very good. So how does it read now?
It would say biologists, well, a biologist, I would say should be, a biologist has been monitoring the eastern and western rookeries, but no data is available at this time.
Okay, and that was that information provided to us by Julie Jackson?
Ian said that there would not be any report until 3 years, after 3 more years of monitoring, which is just starting now.
Okay.
I think that's where the 3-year got in there, but it's confusing the way it is in here.
Yes. So now when I was, what I remember of that is we were looking for information about the, about what had possibly happened to the heron rookery. I mean, we weren't looking for the report. We were just looking for, observational data or something like that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, although I think that came up later in the meeting after the discussion. Then we had a motion to request that information, and that's what we are requesting. Just that when Ian explained the situation, he basically said that there wouldn't be any report for 3 years forward. So just what's here, and really the main inaccuracy is the reporting to ODFW, because there's no reporting to ODFW.
Right. Okay. But I'm just kind of trying to get at, it seemed to me like something had changed here, where essentially we were just saying, I mean, we were asking in kind of more generally who was available. I mean, who goes, who's like around that area, it's like anyone who's around. And so we were just inquiring about, isn't there a wildlife biologist, who comes to this area? So, but now it's kind of been changed into, well, there's a report and it won't be out for 3 years, which seems like it's kind of rerouting our request. Am I remembering correctly?
Well,
I would say, I mean, there was a lot more discussion. We raised the question of if it was unusual activity. I raised the question if there was any log of activities. And I'm just assuming that some of this got missed in the details of the minutes, the idea that this is the question, whether the minutes need to reflect everything in the discussion or not. So certainly there's things missing from this, but just in terms of a minimal correction, I would say this part.
Yeah, Marge?
well, my recollection is that Joel asked for information, and Ian didn't have it, and Julie broke in and said that it wasn't due for 3 years, that a report wasn't due for 3 years. However, they had received some reporting. What I gathered from that back and forth was that Republic Services had received some reporting. They just were not required to share it with us for 3 years. And that bothered me a little bit because to me, why wouldn't you? If you have it, why wouldn't you share it? So that's why I recall it, is because I was a little disturbed by that.
Yeah. So I guess we don't need to go back necessarily to the minutes of the prior meeting, because this is going to come up again in this meeting.
Oh, okay.
And so we can kind of take it from there, essentially, to because we indeed passed a motion and we wanted to get information. And so I passed, because of that request, Daniel inquired with Republic on our behalf. And we haven't gotten any more information, but assuming that, I don't see Ian on this call, so I'm sorry, I need to amend my own statement. We are meeting the DSAC, and so we are missing another member, of DSAC, and that would be Ian McNabb of Republic Services. Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I think I sent you an email, Chair, but Republic did respond and said they weren't going to be providing any more information about rookery data or anything like that during this meeting. And they said it's not going to be available for some time. So I just wanted to clarify there.
Okay. Yeah, Mark.
So I have a couple items. Let me pull this up to clarify here. So in the minutes, under the section that refers to DSAC bylaws, it says Mark made a motion to approve the proposed edits to the SWAC bylaws that were discussed at the July 11, 2022 work session. I assume that must mean, because we have been reviewing both the SWAC bylaws and the DSAC bylaws, I think this probably should be corrected to say proposed edits to the DSAC bylaws. And I open that for discussion for other folks, but I'm thinking that's what that should say. And then the second item is, I read the newspaper article about how the county is trying to sort of make the minutes more concise and all that sort of stuff. But the next section of the bylaws talks about the annual report, in which it says simply here, Ian shared the Republic Service annual report. This information can be found in Exhibit A, which is attached. But there was a very lengthy back and forth discussion with regard to the details of the annual report, and those in fact are missing from these minutes. So there's no indication for anyone who wasn't at the meeting that there was a very lengthy back and forth, not just for, in response to questions from me, but from others who are members of DSAC. So I thought this really understated what took place at the meeting. So I don't know how necessarily to resolve that, but I'm concerned that it's very unrepresentative of the nature of the discussion that took place.
Yes, I definitely definitely concur with that. How do we want to address this situation? So
well, I would first suggest that we modify that section of the minutes that refers to SWAC and change it to DSAC. So so we can correct that pretty easily. And then with regard to the annual report, it's really sort of kind of up to Daniel and to Linda as to how they want to characterize it. But it seems like there should be a sentence or two that would be added that would say there was an extensive discussion regarding the information presented in the annual report, many questions back and forth and responses from the public services. For more information, go look at the video. I don't know. And I see that Daniel's turned his camera on, so maybe he has some thoughts there. Thank you.
Yeah. Daniel, do you indeed have some thoughts?
I have a couple. So Mark is definitely right where there's not a ton that's required in the minutes, but certainly kind of capturing as much of the essence of like the bare kind of conversation that took place is I think that can be included in the minutes. But yeah, there's not a ton of requirements for what shows up there. But I have a question for the group, I guess. Is there anything specific information that you think would be helpful to include in the minutes here? Anything come to mind that is a detail that maybe doesn't show up in the annual report, for example, that could be referenced? And then the second thing is referencing the video is probably not an option, mainly because the video isn't going to be accessible publicly forever, while the written minutes are a permanent record as part of Oregon state law. So I think referencing outside document like that, we should try to reference information that can be included in the written minute appendix, I guess, if possible. So I guess back to the group, if there's anything pertinent that you think we should include or capture as part of that information, I think it would be really helpful as we go back through and try to add whatever information you'd like to see in there.
Yeah, so the thought that occurs to me is, well, Joel, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it. There were quite a few details. I mean, for example, that the document listed the health department as the recipient, as just one example of things that probably we should have expected would be corrected in a final draft of the report. And I also wanted to point out since the report was also included in the meeting packet for the previous meeting, it seems very redundant to include it also as an appendix to the meeting minutes of this meeting. So, but a revised report that corrects some of the things we brought up would be good.
Yeah, the report is included in this packet at my request because I want to continue discussing it, because indeed we did have a substantial discussion about it and quite a few questions, and I have further questions, I think, about that. So I my point of view at this point is that I understand the desire to streamline the minutes, but this seems to be overly streamlined. I certainly understand how that there is a certain difficulty in doing the minutes and actually capturing what transpires, and to capture the things we think are really valuable. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what is the thing that we can do what are the magic words that the council members can say so that a reaction is indeed recorded in the minutes? So for example, can a council member say, I would like the minutes to reflect, and say something, and have the minutes then reflect that? Yeah, Chuck. You're still muted, Chuck.
I got a trigger button down here. Sorry. Let's see. parliamentary, correct me if I'm wrong, usually a motion is made, it's second discussion, and then it's voted up and down. But since it's voted up or down, does it necessarily need a discussion because of the motion carried or was denied? That's a question.
So, well, I myself would say that the discussion about a motion is kind of some of the most important things that go on in a meeting, where people say, well, the reason I'm voting this, I'm voting for this or I'm voting against it are for the following reasons. And so, but we don't do a lot of motions. I mean, we're asking a lot of questions and so for us to have minutes which really focus on motions and votes and that sort of thing, I think it really kind of cramps our style, for one thing. And I don't want to promise that we can make a lot of behavioral changes in order to make the minutes more, easier to write. Yeah, Marge.
Is there a way that we can receive the minutes sooner so that, say, within a week after the meeting, the minutes are circulated, and then if anyone has additions or changes, they can make them at that time and send them back to Linda, and Linda can incorporate it?
Yeah, Daniel.
So I can respond to Marge and then kind of provide general feedback on this. So it's not going to be realistic to expect the minutes within that first week. I think receiving the minutes a week ahead of the meeting, which is how it is currently set up, gives the group plenty of time. I think that's the way that we're going to be continuing moving forward. We can definitely kind of keep an eye out for opportunity to increase that speed, but I think that it's pretty standard to receive these minutes a week in advance of your meeting review. And that sort of leads me to my next suggestion, based on Chair Eklund's comment. I think the magic words of including it in the minutes, you can, if you want, you could say something like, can we add this to the minutes? Let the minutes reflect whatever you'd like. But I think the discussion we're having right now is really that opportunity. So I think this is an item that was a little bit complex, and I think there was obviously a lot of discussion that went in there. So I think what we're doing right now is amending the minutes to reflect the discussion that we'd like to, make sure is made into the minutes. If minutes don't reflect an adequate amount of discussion that occurred, what I suggest is sort of referring to your own notes. When you get the minutes a week in advance, try to jot down some ideas about what you'd like to see in those minutes. And then when you come to this meeting to review the minutes, you can provide those suggestions. Otherwise, I think in this case, we're also happy to just try to revise the minutes as best we can based on your more kind of general feedback about it not capturing everything. We're happy to do that. I just wanted to reflect that. It doesn't have to be overly formal like Chair Eklund suggested. I think we can do that if there's something really important that you think you really want to have in the minutes. But I think generally, try to keep an eye out for really important details while we're having these discussions. And if you don't see that detail made it into the minutes, we can certainly amend that during this process.
Yeah, Mark.
So thank you for that, Daniel. I guess my suggestion would be, so that we can keep moving forward in tonight's meeting, that we postpone the adoption of these minutes, ask the staff to come back with revised minutes. I'm in a different physical location this evening, and I don't have my many pages of notes that I used for guiding my conversation with Republic Services and review of the annual meeting. So I can't say what those things are right off the top of my head. But I think that if Linda or Daniel would go through the video and / audio of the meeting you could probably highlight, I know there was extensive discussion about the capacity of the landfill and comparing last year to this year's report. And there were so many things that I sort of went through that Ian responded to. I think it would be helpful to sort of, you don't have to get into the details necessarily, but there was discussion of this and this and this. I would just suggest that that we postpone the adoption of the minutes this evening and ask the staff to work to revise those minutes to reflect the depth of the conversation that took place during the review of the annual report and bring those back to us. I would say not at the October meeting, which is, I think, the next meeting of the, at least as I saw it, of DSAC, but maybe at the next meeting of the SWAC. So that just food for thought for the group.
Yeah, Marge, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, would it be appropriate for members of the council who have changes to reflect that to Linda before the meeting, and copy us on it so that we're all aware of changes? So the thing is, there have been issues, and then it takes a lot of time in the next meeting to go over it. I'm trying to think of a way that we can do it before the meeting, or at least take care of some of this before the meeting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's 6:23 now.
Yeah.
We've covered
Daniel?
one item.
Yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from, Marge. Unfortunately, offline kind of development of things like this really can't occur. These sort of discussions have to happen during meetings. That being said, what you could do ahead of a meeting is provide a public comment that makes it into the packet. You can say the minutes should be reflected in this way, especially if it's any detailed, like in this case. I think that would be really helpful. Then we can essentially get feedback from the group. We can copy and paste those suggestions, and I think it would streamline it a bit. But yeah, the in-between meeting discussion via email unfortunately can't occur here. But
that's a good suggestion, Daniel. I mean, that essentially does it according to the law. That essentially does what I am asking for in a lawful manner.
So I'm not sure that I understand that though, Daniel, about comments to the minutes being included in the packet, because the minutes are in the packet.
Yeah.
So the packet has already been released.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying, Chair, is that the minutes can't be revised between meetings based on committee member or council member feedback, right? Because that discussion has to happen during the meeting. But what we can do, if it helps kind of streamline the process, is writing down those changes ahead of time. And this has been done in the past, but essentially just writing down those suggested changes. So that way the group can look at those suggested changes, say, hey, we like these suggested changes. Let's move forward with those. And then at the you could adopt the minutes based on adhering to those suggested changes, for example, or you could have it like tonight's suggestion, which is bringing it to the following meeting, incorporating those suggested changes. But yeah, between meetings, if you receive a draft of the minutes, you're not able to have a discussion, collaborate on what those minutes could be revised to look like, and then have those minutes show up at your following meeting. Basically, all that has to happen during a meeting. So that makes sense.
Well,
Just one quick comment. Can you release a second packet so that the first packet is released? Mark writes down everything that he wants to say, and that is released in a second packet on the day of the meeting, say. I think that's happened before.
Sorry, go on, Chair.
Well, I'm just saying this is getting more and more complex. So I'm going to just divert for a moment, and because I have a kind of a separate, but as it turns out, a comment that relates, which is I really need to see the minutes before I can do the agenda. So I'm not really able to take notes when I'm chairing a meeting. I mean, that's just something I can't do. So it would be very helpful for me if I could see the minutes before I actually come up with the agenda. So I would really like to push hard for having a release of the minutes. You know, I understand if it takes more than a week to do it, but I would like to have them released, you know, earlier than 1 week before, because I'm in this conundrum where the minutes are going to be in the packet, but my agenda also has to be in the packet. So I have to come up with the agenda before I can even see the minutes and really remember what we've discussed. And there's also a loss that goes on if we don't see the minutes, you know, until 3 weeks or more after the meeting. I mean, we're just forgetting essentially what happened. So it's difficult for us to, you know, to relate to that. So I think the solution that we've got here, because we are spending a lot of time on this, is indeed to postpone the approval of these minutes. You know, I think there needs to be another draft done, I guess. So comments sent to you, Daniel, for you and Linda to reflect, and then we have a version 2 of the minutes, an updated version.
Yeah. So I might have to think about this a little bit more just to make sure we can do this in a way that works well with public meetings law. But I think generally, if you send your comments on the minutes to me, that's okay. But what I think the best option at this point is, since we've gleaned a little bit of information about what you'd like to see in this section. So I think what we need to do is go back and redraft this section of the minutes. But again, we're running into doing work offline as a group to construct these minutes. So I don't think, I just have to think about that a little bit more. But what I think we'll probably do is review this meeting, get as many of the kind of key areas that we can get into the minutes, and then come back to the group with the draft. And I suggest jotting down as many kind of ideas and comments as you can between the time that you receive the draft minutes ahead of the next meeting. And then we'll go from there and see what you think.
Okay. It seems like what we're heading for is a system where we look at the minutes and then we return them back to you. And then, you know, at the following meeting, the minutes come up again and we you know, see if the comments have been incorporated. So, you know, and also there's a separate request, which is I would like to see the minutes before I need to provide the agenda. So either you can, you know, move my agenda deadline, you know, make that sooner. Anyway, that's really the dilemma, and I think it goes back over to you, Daniel, to kind of see what you can do behind the scenes for us.
Sure. Yeah, I think we can look at you know, what we can do to get you the agenda, and certainly we also have the meeting recordings available for anybody who wants to review in between meetings, and that's available immediately. So we'll work on that and see what we can get done for the following meeting.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Any other comments on this issue, Joel?
Oh, I'm sorry, did you say Joel? I wanted to just suggest making a motion that we do not accept the minutes at this meeting, that members, each of us can give our comments to Daniel as public comments ahead of the next meeting packet, and then we will consider them at the next meeting.
Okay. Motion so made. Is there a second? Marge.
I'll second. Sure.
Okay. Marge or Chuck, they both second. So all in favor of that motion?
So if I can interrupt, Chair? I'm not
Yes.
sure. Let's have some discussion. I'm not sure that Joel's motion is necessary. So generally, after you have a motion and a second, you would say any discussion, and
Yes.
my discussion would be, I think if we just don't take any action on the minutes are not adopted, and it gives us the opportunity to proceed through the process that Daniel has recommended. And I would encourage people to request copies of the or links to the video so we can go through and highlight the issues. But I don't know that there's a need for a motion to not adopt the minutes. If we simply don't adopt them, they die at this point.
Yeah. Joel?
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to move on somehow, but I'll
Yeah.
withdraw my motion.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
That's great. So I think that's all understood. And Daniel, it would be great if you could draft up a memo, essentially describe, to distribute to us later, that kind of gives us some guidance as to how best to proceed along the way. So to put it out very clearly, just so that we understand that.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Thank you all. I think that was an important discussion to have, but now I think we've got what we need. It's only taken a half hour longer than we thought. So now we come to the community member comments section, very important. So so then we're going to open this up. So are there indeed community members who would like to speak? If so, please turn on your cameras, raise your hands. Okay, anyone? Oh, yes, Paul.
Hi, I'd like to make just a couple of quick comments on an item, methane, that I think relates to your item 7 that's going to be discussed later this evening in terms of providing guidance to the Board of Commissioners. I, at the last minute, got an email out to Daniel to be distributed to you on this topic. I apologize for the lateness of this input, but I thought I'd just go through it real quickly verbally. And then at the end, I have a suggestion on a path forward in terms of methane assessment for the county. So in terms of background, I'm sure everybody here is pretty familiar with the basic problem of methane. There are a couple of points here, though, that I just wanted to note. First of all, a California study published in 2019 found that the largest methane emitters in California are a subset of landfills, and that landfills total about 41% of the California point source methane emissions. So it's a significant contributor in California. And the fact that it's a subset tells me that some landfills are high emitters and others are not. And so there's some uncertainty there. And I think that really would encourage us to get data on our own landfill. There certainly are now increasing amounts of focus on methane as a greenhouse gas in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, for example. And we have the recent guidance from Commissioner Augereau to consider landfill methane emissions as part of the Community Resilience Initiative. So I think there's more and more attention is being applied to this issue, but we still are kind of on the leading edge of the curve in terms of trying to find community ways to assess how big this problem is. Is it a real problem or not? So the only data that I know that we have is the Coffin Butte reports under Title V that are submitted by the franchisee to the DEQ. And interestingly enough, in the June report, the measurements of the surface emission monitoring measurement actually exceeded the DEQ thresholds on the day they happened to measure it. And then 9 days later, the levels were dramatically lower. That's all available in the report that's online now in Daniel's library. So there seems to be a lot of uncertainty here regarding methane. And so my conclusion is independent assessment of the volume of methane emissions from Coffin Butte would provide useful guidance to Benton County administrators and its citizens. And so in terms of how you get that assessment, there are two basic paths. They're the standard intensive, let's figure out what's going in the landfill, let's do multi-day aircraft flyovers, lots of detailed analysis by experts. That gives you a pretty high confidence answer, but it tends to take a lot of time and it costs on the order of $50,000. There's now new technology from a company, for example, called GHGSat, that has satellites in orbit, and they're constantly scanning. And for a relatively small amount of money, roughly $4,000, you can get a point source single snapshot image. And so that's my suggestion, is that this body make a motion to recommend to the Board of Commissioners to approve the purchase of the satellite methane imagery for an initial kind of gross level assessment of, does it look like we have a problem or not? And then from that point, we could kind of go down a tree of, if it doesn't look like we have a problem, we could probably do two things, and that is just periodic gross level monitoring, and also hope that governmental agencies ramp up and require more detailed reporting from landfills, which may very well happen. Or if it looks like we have quite a methane plume coming off of Coffin Butte, we could then go down the more intensive detailed study route if we thought that was advisable. But I really strongly would encourage this group to recommend to the Board of Commissioners that we spend a relatively modest amount of money to attain what will probably be some fairly gross level data, but I still think would be valuable for us as a starting point in terms of assessing this, this potential problem. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so that's something to incorporate as part of our item 7 when we're talking about the independent landfill data verification. So any other comments from the public? I'm not seeing any. So thank you very much for that. Let's move on to, so the Heron Rookery inquiry. So I'm not sure what more there is to say here. I just kind of circle back, I guess, to the comment that I had, where it seemed like the discussion that we had was this sort of, I don't know, conversion of, we were really looking for, anecdotal information, if you will. I mean, just personal observations, or at least access to someone, who had been actually around and who might know something more than we did. And instead that became, that's somehow transmogrified into a request for reporting from an actual study, et cetera, when we're not actually interested in the study, we're interested in that particular bit of information. That's really where, that's kind of all I have about that particular discussion. Is there any more comments that can be made? Do we want to kind of clarify a request to Republic and other people about that? Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I thought our request was pretty clear, that we were just asking for this year's observations, and they're following a standard protocol, so it would be easy to do. I wanted to ask Daniel if he received a formal reply from Republic, and maybe that should just go on the record as what response we received on this, and then there's not much else we can do.
Yeah, so Daniel, can you tell us a bit about the reply that you received?
Sure. Yeah. So can you hear me okay? Oh, there we go. So essentially, at the request of the group, I reached out to Julie Jackson over at Republic Services and essentially posed the question, are you interested in bringing monitoring information regarding the Heron Rookery to the next meeting? And they just sent me an email response back saying that they're not, and that they wouldn't have information available to share for some time, was the response. In terms of it being formal, I'm not sure, it wasn't on letterhead or anything like that, but it was just an email back and forth with Republic and I.
Okay. So Daniel, what would be the best way for us to incorporate that information in the public records for, can we request that be made part of the minutes for this meeting?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly a public record. So we could add that as I guess, an appendix to the meeting minutes for this meeting, and this conversation could reference that if that works for the group.
Yeah. Is that good, Joel? Is that what you're looking for? Okay.
Well, I was really looking for the data, but I think that's what we can do at this point. So.
Right. Yes. Yes. We were indeed looking for information, not providing information, but as you said, that seems to be the best we can do at this point in time. Let the minutes reflect. I mean, Republic is not present at this meeting, so we can't refer those questions to them or get any direct action that way. Yeah, Marge.
We could add the email, that exchange with Daniel, to the public record.
Yes, we're going to incorporate those as an appendix to the minutes.
Okay.
For this meeting. Okay, yeah, Debbie.
One thing that I heard earlier, I think it's important we don't just take anecdotal information. I think it's important to wait for the expert information. And I really think Marge, and who else is going to be on it? Was it Mark? It's going to be on the special meeting that's going to meet Sam Imperati's follow-up meeting. Anyway, I imagine that wildlife is going to be part of that too, and that will be kept up to date on that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, there's nothing on the agenda. I've looked through the schedule. I was going to give a report to the SWAC on that, but there isn't really any space for this kind of discussion in that series of meetings. So.
Yeah. So it's Joel and Marge who are our representatives to the Trash Talk work group. All right. Are we done with the heron rookery? Not much more to say, I guess, on that subject. So shall we move on then to the looking again at the Recycling Center annual report. And so so if Nancy Whitcomb could join us here for that, because she's got some items that she would like to bring forward regarding that annual report. So I'm just going to state again for and to be included in the minutes for this next meeting. I just want to run down part of the discussion that we had, about essentially the stated capacity of the landfill. And I wanted to kind of, have Ian here so I could really clarify, because I think I left a little bit confused about what I had heard. But what I remember is that the volume, which is stated in the annual report, is actually the volume which includes it's airspace that's created by removal of rock, essentially by the quarry. So that actual volume of airspace is not available until the quarry is done with its quarrying, which by the timeline which Ian told us then, it actually isn't going to occur until the year 2030. So, it's going to take about 8 more years for the quarry to actually exhaust that amount of rock. So that's one issue, because, but the other half of that, of course, is that garbage doesn't start going into that section of the landfill in the year 2030. It starts going in as soon as the current cell fills, which is going to be in a couple of years. Not exactly sure how many. So garbage magically disappears while quarry rock is still being removed, it seems, if you look at the numbers in the annual report for that data. So again, I would like to have Ian here on the call, but he's not here. We can't really get any clarification on that. But I would like the minutes to show that there's a serious discrepancy. And so one of the items that I want to bring up in this section is, we as a body have the ability to pass the annual report along with any sort of commentary. We have the ability to deny it. We can kind of do whatever we want recommendation wise in how the county should treat this annual report. So, and the other part in that same section is that the duration of the landfill, the remaining life of it, is based upon it says in the annual report, it's based upon an intake of 750,000 tons a year. But the last year that the landfill took in that low of an amount was the year 2016. Every year since then has been greater than 750,000 tons. And we have information, I think, from Paul Neatfeld that we're on track, to have basically 50% more than 750,000 tons to be the intake for this year. So the that section of the annual report, I think to the layperson, you come away with a very different impression about what the actual future of the landfill is, because those numbers are not really telling you the full story. I mean, that's what I take away from it, as indeed a layperson. And I understand things are very complex, and there are densities to be considered, and other things such as that, and that tons is not volume, tons is not cubic yards. I mean, there's all these conversion factors or whatever. But based upon what I know at this point in time, I mean, I personally cannot recommend, that we pass this annual report or without comment, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of why I brought this subject back up. Yeah, Chuck.
Thank you, Chair. Let's see, how can I state this? Daniel was kind enough to build a library, and when I was looking through it, I happened to come across Geologic Associates, who are professional engineers hired by Valley Landfills, Inc. And within this, they've stamped the report, and in particular there, they have a schedule that some of the other members were talking about, where it calls out cells 5 through 6I, gives the acres of the area, the capacity, the cumulative capacity, as the aggregates building, the total life of the cell, and the year capacity is reached. And it's pretty straightforward. I think that's what the members were looking for, instead of the equation back and forth and head there. I think it would be, since this was submitted and collected, it also gives leachate quantities coming out through different years and so forth like that. I just found it today, so I'm kind of brief on it, but it's got a lot of information that Ian talked about, but I never knew where the report was, and it's resident in our library. So I think that would be benefit some of the members too, looking at this report, which is the basis, and it also has, drawings in there that shows where each of the cells are. So you've got a good drawing in there with contours and scale drawings, I should say, to show everything, so it correlates back and forth from a technical standpoint. So I think it would be good to have a little time to maybe look at this report in context with what Ian has put, to see if we can say, hey, we approve what the geoengineers have stated here and stamped. So there's not so many disparities that we can say, here's a baseline for us. Here's the baseline for the leachates. Here's the baselines for this. Here's the baseline for the aerials. So I think this is a good report to look at first, but because I've just found it, it'd be nice to have other eyes on it first before we approve the other report, if you would, please. Thank you.
Sure. So thanks, Chuck, for bringing that forward, because that is indeed something that I want to look at. But it sounds like they are looking at existing cells. And what we're really concerned with is kind of the new cell, which will occupy the space which is currently being used by the quarry. It's currently being quarried.
That is in there too, the number 5.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct. It shows the active shell cells, the future cells, and some of the closed cells too. Put it in context there.
Okay, good.
Again,
Well, thank you for.
Yeah, I just found it this afternoon, so I'm just quickly paraphrasing there. So I appreciate everybody else's eyes on it first too.
Sure. So thank you, Chuck. Yeah, Mark.
So I would appreciate it, Chuck, if you could send out to the group or maybe through Daniel the specific link or reference to which document, because when I go to the library, there is so much stuff there. It is overwhelming. And so I would appreciate if the specific document that you're referencing in your discussion here, you could forward through Daniel to the group, or maybe Daniel already knows which one it is because he's turned on his camera, and you could send it out to the group. I think that would be super helpful. Thank you very much.
Me too.
Yes, it's quite big, so I was going to send the whole thing once, and then I couldn't get to the file. So Daniel can probably put a direction to it if you would be so kind.
That'd be great. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, it's called the 2021 Coffin Butte Landfill Site Development Plan. It was provided so it's at the very top of the library page when you go under you go to the document, the document library, and it was provided in response to a records request, apparently by Benton County. I've looked at it too briefly. 2 things I think should be said. Number 1, this is a consultant's report and not a statement by Republic Services. So legally, there's a difference in terms of reporting. When we ask for an annual report, we're asking for a statement directly from Republic. And as a consultant, I do this all the time. I write a report, and my clients will either stamp it and say, we agree with this, or they'll say, this is the consultant's opinion. I don't see anything like that on this report. So we're left to take it as a consultant's report, basically. And the other thing is it doesn't really address the tonnage issues. It addresses volume, which is good. That's clearly stated, but I don't think it covers everything that Ken is asking for.
Are we looking at the same one? It says Site Development Plan, Coffin Butte Landfill, submitted by Valley Landfills, Inc., prepared by Geologic?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Because it down into it too, it talks about a conversion as well. So
yeah, there's a very rough conversion, but it's not really explicit, and it I don't think it covers everything that Ken's talking about.
Right.
Oh, not everything Ken is talking about. It doesn't take in methane or that. It's just a matter of it has a little bit more credence to what Ian was referring to one time when he was saying with their consultants and so forth. So I think you can put it in context with the report. I'll let Daniel go, if it's okay with the chair.
Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple contextual pieces of information that might be helpful. So this site development plan is essentially required every time there's a new 10-year DEQ permit for the solid waste disposal site. So this is submitted as part of that permit process, is my understanding, to DEQ. So that was where this, I guess, comes from. And then the other piece is the annual report for the landfill that you reviewed at your last meeting. The context there is essentially from our franchise agreement. We have two pieces of reporting that are required. One is operational reports and the other is capacity reports. So typically when DSAC has reviewed the annual report, which is sort of an accumulation of both operational and capacity reports, what DSAC is essentially reviewing in part when they're making a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners to either accept or not accept that, is in relation to their deliverable in that franchise agreement. If that makes sense. That's sort of the context of the recommendation that this group has made in the past. And a recommendation isn't required by DSAC for that, but that's sort of the approach that has been taken so far.
Okay. So Chuck.
Yes, I understand what Daniel is saying in reference to the franchise hauler perspective. But some of the members of the community were asking relative other questions that was towards the capacity of the landfill. So what I'm saying is some of that information is in here relative to those questions. So that's the reason I was trying to put it in context there. When we look at capacity and cell sizes and everything, it would be both, look at both of those to answer those questions.
Okay. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, I do appreciate you bringing this up, and I should emphasize it does actually address some of the questions about leachate, and it also, as you said, it addresses the capacity in terms of cubic yards. But as I've looked through it, there's not a way to make a link with the annual tonnage and what's actually left in terms of space. You know, there are some estimates of lifetime. So that's where we get stuck, I think.
Yeah. Oh.
But it's a good report for everyone to look at, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
Yes, I understand, but what I'm saying is that the conversion factor of solid waste is variable based on moisture counts and everything else like that. So that is an average, where the engineer's report deals with the volume that was created in the hole. So I would say that the geological report stands to the volume there, and that elusive butterfly of scaling back and forth on a rainy day with solid waste can be debated forever. But I would say if the equation is 0.95 or 98 or 99, we can work that, but we're basing it on the volume and then add a slide conversion of the solid waste.
Okay. To be honest, Chuck, I'm not sure that I'm following you. We're a little far down into the weeds. You know, the thing that I'm saying is that the annual report should reflect, you know, kind of the actual numbers for the status quo, and you know, to count as, and the way I understand it is, you know, right now the number which is in the annual report counts space which is occupied currently by solid rock as indeed airspace that will be, you know, used for garbage. And there isn't really any sort of clear pathway by which that rock gets removed and the garbage placed there. So there's just a disconnect in terms of how that actually you know, how that flow actually happens. but I think we're just kind of talking around in circles. Certainly, I know that I'm repeating myself, and we have Nancy here on the line and so I'm going to turn it over. Nancy, you had you have a memo for us. It's in the packet.
Right, and I'll go over it quickly in the interest of efficiency. So what I'm just asking for basically is more granular traffic information in this page that we keep seeing over and over in the annual report. Everybody familiar with this one? Right? So I was looking at this initially, and it's just not a very useful table, and it could be easily made more useful with information that I think that Republic Services already collects. And so in the interest of making easy things better, what I would like to do is to have them add a new column right after the C and D here that just is the number of vehicles and the class of vehicles. So if you are interested in land use and transportation planning, there are vehicle classes there. Let's see, there's the camera. So these are standard vehicle classes. They are well known by people. And this one right here, that's a pickup truck. This right here is the type of truck that comes to the dump a lot. And so I think it would be very useful for you guys to know how many pickup trucks versus how many of these gigantic, enormous 6-axle trucks that are actually quite dangerous on our little winding roads there are. I think that would help everybody make better decisions about it. And so, so what I would ask for is a new column after there are commercial vehicles that has the number and class breakdown of those vehicles. And then here in private vehicles, the same thing, number and class of private vehicles, and also what the private vehicles contain, because there's a disparity in the waste that they say is coming from Benton County. When you're looking at that, you know, if you're just a normal person, you're like, oh, so people not in Corvallis are bringing 53,000 tons of waste to the landfill in their little pickup trucks. Well, that ends up not being correct. You know, there are some people who are bringing their waste to the landfill in their pickup trucks, and some of them aren't even included in that number. People who are bringing yard waste and everything that we bring to the dump, for example, all of our tree limbs and that type of thing. So it would be very useful to have a breakdown like they have in the other column for their commercial vehicles. It would be good to have a breakdown between municipal solid waste that's I think it's non-Republic people who are bringing municipal solid waste in from other counties. And Daniel told me, because I asked him what else is included there, and he said a lot of it is some waste that it would be useful to know what it is, like sewage sludge and petroleum contaminated soil, asbestos, and you know, in 20 years, when we find out that one of these things is maybe more toxic than we think it is now, it might be useful to know how much of it is there. And so that's what I'm asking for. Republic, I'm sure, collects all this information, and you should ask them to give it to you in a better format that's going to be more usable. And if you want, I can do I can add the new columns and send this to you for the next meeting. And then the rest of my letter was just asking for additional trip generation information that would be useful. So the landfill isn't just trucks bringing municipal solid waste into the landfill. It's also bringing compostable land waste in, and I don't think that's included in this at all. You need to know, how many people are bringing waste in and how many people are coming and picking up compost as well. That's an important issue when you're looking at what do the roads, what can they bear? What is the total trip generation of this? Another category is leachate. It would be very useful to know how many trucks per day are taking leachate away from the facility. All you have to do is leachate spill, just Google leachate spill. You're going to see a lot of articles come up, and they're pretty horrifying. But it would be good to know, what are the chances of potentially a leachate spill on our little roads. So the PRC, leachate hauling, gravel trucks, and trip generation that is bringing the alternate daily cover, that the garbage ash from the Covanta plant into the landfill. How many trucks per day of those are there? And that will help us verify Benton County's municipal solid waste numbers that we get from DEQ. We'll be able to check them and to cross-check them and see whether see how accurate this information is. And that was all I was asking for. I think that this would be useful for SWAC DSAC, because one of your mandates is transportation and the impacts of the landfill on the surrounding roadways. And I think it also will be useful for this solid waste working group. And that's it. And thank you guys very much. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Nancy. So Daniel, I guess I have a question. What is the procedure by which we make a recommendation for different data, for better data to be included in the annual report? The annual report, right, is basically a response to what the county requests of Republic under the franchise agreement. So what exactly is the procedure? I guess what action can DSAC take, essentially, in this regard, if it chooses to act?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple different actions. One action is obviously asking the disposal site operators to collect this information and report this information on the annual reports. And I think that's kind of an easy, quick option for the group to take. The other option is also when you're providing feedback to the Board of Commissioners about the annual report, providing these details about the type of information and the way you want information laid out in a report, or the way that you think would be most helpful for the county. I think that's a really helpful and good opportunity to provide feedback to the Board of Commissioners in that capacity. I think those are the two kind of obvious ones that stand out here.
Okay. So to clarify, the first one you said, is to ask essentially ask Republic to include this information in the end report. Would that be actually coming from us? DSAC requests that you include this? Who would that request to Republic be coming from? And your first option.
So I think in the first option it would be DSAC essentially asking the landfill operator to provide more information, right? It would be a request that they're not required to do, and it would just be representative of the local advisory group asking for that from the site operator, which I think is fair and not required of them, but I think it's one approach to take. And then certainly you have the more formal approach, asking the Board of Commissioners to sort of make that type of information a priority when they're formally accepting those terms in the franchise agreement, being the operational and capacity reports that they receive.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. So Marge.
Well, I think it would carry a lot more weight if we included it in the report to the commissioners and asked. I mean, we could ask Republic as well as a courtesy. We certainly could do that. But I think it definitely should go to the Board of Commissioners.
Right. Again,
You know, if there's a motion or, you know, if this requires a motion for this kind of thing, then I would make that a motion. That we, how is this report for the commissioners going to be composed?
well, that's a good question for us to decide, because we now have a number of issues that we want to address concerning the report. So it seems like we do indeed want to have commentary of some kind attached to this report, you know, and we're talking about essentially where the various subjects are, and that be forwarded on to the Board of Commissioners. So, yeah. Go ahead, Chuck, and then you, Mark.
Sorry, Mark. I was just saying who would be in alliance with this too is Benton County Public Works, because also in a transportation plan, they need to keep track of sizes of trucks and cars and everything from turning radiuses, stopping distances, and everything else in conjunction with this and the intersection at 99W. So it's a really relevant type of analysis, knowing what type of trucks are actually going in there, and then obviously, you know, what the cargo is. If they have a bill of lading stating what the cargo is and what a vehicle number is, so it all ties together tight with them. It's just a matter of have some consistency to say yes that we've had 53 semis through there, X amount of pickups, X amount of trailers and stuff. So I think that is a good position to weigh in with Public Works as well as with DSAC.
Okay, that can certainly be part of our comments about that. So, Mark?
Yes, I was just referring back to the language that exists in the franchise agreement, which, if I can bring this up and read it to you, basically says that, sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble here. This is under section 7 of the 2020 franchise agreement, reports, inspections, annual meetings of the parties. Subsection A says operational reports within 150 days after the first anniversary of the effective date and every year thereafter. The franchisee shall report to the board an annual report with respect to the environmental conditions of the landfill, not defined, of course, covering air, water, solid waste permits, pollution controls, and related issues as determined by both parties. So there's a pretty broad wording there with regard to what sorts of information the Board of Commissioners might request. There's an additional section, sub B, that says within 150 days after the second anniversary of the effective date and every year thereafter, franchisee shall provide the board the necessary data to confirm the remaining capacity of the landfill as determined by both parties. The data shall include the methods and calculations used in this determination. So we might need to refer to the franchise agreement because that is a governing document with regard to the relationship between the board and their service provider, Republic Services. But that may be a document that we need to check in with.
Okay. Yeah, Daniel.
I just had one other suggestion. It came to my mind that talking to Republic Services about this request might be really helpful too, just to get some kind of preliminary insight on, what sort of information they're able to collect under their certain sort of current operations, and that way you can have that context for whatever recommendation you want to pass on to the board as well. I guess I'm suggesting asking Republic Services these questions, getting some context, and then B, making a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners about it.
So yes, I mean, in a better world, I guess. I mean, I would be certainly kind of all about that. But again, I'm a little bit unhappy that Republic is not actually here, so that we can't just settle that. I mean, that's supposed to be what happens at these public meetings, is we do indeed have these sorts of discussions so that we can figure out a way forward. So the other thing that I want to just say is that kind of the purpose of this meeting in my mind is really, we know that the Trash Talk work group is about to convene. They're going to start their operations before we have another meeting. And so I really want to get as much information, and good information, in front of Marge and Joel as our representatives for that meeting. So I'm really reluctant to go into some sort of cycle, that'll take us many meetings to resolve and kind of miss that window of opportunity. So I'm really looking for what is a way for us to move ahead with this. I think we know that we have comments that we would like to put attached to the annual report as written, and send on to the Board of Commissioners, saying, hey, we have requests essentially for more information. There's a lack of information that we're getting. Some of this other information seems to be, as near as we can tell, misleading. Certainly we get a different impression than, kind of however that goes forward. So I'm wondering if, am I correct in saying that that's something that we would like to do as a body? And then I guess my, excuse me, my further question is how best for us to do that in a timely way? Yeah, Chuck.
I think, if you will, Daniel hit the nail on the head by first evaluating what the current operations is with Republic. If they have all the elements already in their database, it's just a matter of people puking it out. It's another thing if they have to change their whole operations. So I think if we could first look at if they can facilitate that with different types of vehicles and what their laden cargo is on that, that would give us an insight to take option 1 or 2 or 3, hold up on it, work it through with the commissioners on the franchise agreement, or circulate it to the Oregon consensus.
Okay. Debbie, did I see your hand up there? Yeah, Debbie.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about it. So do we need to invite Republic to the meetings to talk to them about this? I'm pretty much never sure how much it seems like very little communication can occur outside of these meetings. So do we need to put it on a future agenda item to invite them and ask them more questions, or is there a more direct, quicker way to do it? And I don't know.
Okay. Well, that is a good question. It seems a little strange to invite a member of this body. I mean, Ian McNabb is on this committee, so so a request from us would kind of be a pointed one, I think. It's like, hey, can you make their next meeting?
But you want it to be, you want them to be here.
Well, yes, no,
Will they be
I'm
appointed? I mean, I don't know why somebody's not here today. It typically is, this is not a DSAC, correct? So maybe they just didn't schedule it in. I don't know.
yeah, it's true. I mean, his name is on the agenda, so I'll just point that out. But yeah, Marge?
Well, I got the impression from Ian's report last meeting, and I asked him some questions, some specific questions. And I believe he said, it certainly is my impression, that the report that we received, or the PRC report, annual report, that format has been in place for years. And they just update the numbers every year. And that is their opinion of what they are required to report based on the franchise agreement. So that's why I suggest that we go and make a comment to the Board of Commissioners, because I think Republic thinks that they're doing exactly what they ought to be doing, or have to be doing. So I just think, yes, we can certainly talk to them about it, but and
Yeah.
that's people can review our last meeting and see what conclusions they draw. But I think he was pretty clear about that.
Okay. Yeah, Chuck?
I like what Marge is saying, but do we have certain mandates, or do we have certain goals to work through, or say? What I'm trying to say is, for instance, the sustainability folks are working through guidelines for all the departments. That was in the packet with it today. And when I went through it, there was no guidelines for solid waste in the sense of here's a goal. We want to look at what type of material is transferred into the landfill. And if we systematically put those in a guidelines or mantras, everybody refers that we've got guidelines, but I've never seen any guidelines. So that's what I'm struggling for, is we say if we pass something, put this in the guidelines, then we have a guideline to work off of. That gives notice to Republic that we're working on the goals. Now we're going to look to the processes here, which says we need this type of vehicles through here. And I think that kind of puts it up on the scoreboard and the goalposts where we're going to go with this. And as we get other items or so forth, is maybe have to mandate them under that type of ritual, if you would.
So Chuck, I guess I'm just not understanding what you mean exactly by guidelines. I mean, the disposal site advisory committee has, indeed its charter or things that it wants to do or that it's charged to do, and one of them is to consider matters brought up by members of the public, regarding the landfill. And so that's essentially what we're doing here. I think Nancy, being a member of the public, has come forward essentially with an idea about how we can obtain better information, in the annual report. And certainly reviewing the annual report, since it comes from the landfill, that falls solidly. I mean, it has to do with the relationship between the county and the landfill. I mean, that's why it came to us in the first place. So I'm not sure exactly what the guidelines mean, but this solidly seems to be within the sorts of things that we should be concerned about as a body, and take action on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Chuck?
I agree. Yeah, my first thing was to research to see if there was anything in existence from prior SWAC, and I cannot find anything. So you're absolutely right. something was brought in that has relevancy here with knowing what's coming into the landfill. And we seem to be struggling a little bit how we say we can bring this forward to track that data. It's relevant to DSAC.
So let me interrupt you there. I don't think we're looking for this data. That since we're members of the public, we're not actually concerned with the data, if you will. We're concerned about the process by which data is indeed requested. We're talking about policy regarding data. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. I don't want to put words in Nancy's mouth. Certainly, she would like for us to have that data. But what we're talking about here is a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, essentially, whereupon they request that data.
I thought we had. I'm sorry, I thought we had two options, one where we could request it, and the other option is take it to the commissioners. So when we're trying to find out what would be the most expeditious one to do.
Right, those options are not exclusive, certainly. We can do both at the same time. But part of the conversation has just been that Republic has already kind of stated that the annual report is the annual report. So I think for us to request a change, it would just be a request, and it would take a long time, et cetera. So certainly I'm agreeing with Marge that, I'm favoring the idea of, and because there are other problems with the annual report, which are not requesting data, but instead taking issue with data which is in the annual report. It's not that it's missing, it's misleading actually in the annual report. So I'm looking more for a course of action kind of based upon these discoveries that we've made. I guess I'm looking for a motion, but yeah, Daniel.
I just had a suggestion for moving forward on this. So we have our staff report to essentially bring the operational and capacity reports to the Board of Commissioners, scheduled at this point for October 18th. And in that staff report, we typically provide the information that SWAC and DSAC or DSAC has passed along to the Board of Commissioners as a recommendation. So what I'm suggesting is that for the next meeting, folks, I guess, come prepared to the meeting with specific recommendations or specific pieces of feedback that you'd like to show up in that presentation on October 18th. And I just wanted to make that timeline clear so that way we have kind of a good option for moving forward and including that information in the staff report piece. That's likely where the Board of Commissioners will choose to either adopt or not adopt that operations and capacity report for the landfill. So October 18th is the time that we want this information from DSAC, and I suggest coming to the next meeting and basically letting me know what you think and what you'd like to be included.
Well, the next meeting of DSAC is after October 18th.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I sort of assumed that this meeting would cover a lot of that. So a follow-up would certainly be to make time to cover that topic if you need to at a follow-up meeting. So scheduling a DSAC meeting ahead of SWAC would be really helpful for this specifically.
Joel, and then Mark.
Yeah, my comment's extremely minor. I just wanted to point out that one question raised earlier was what I think Chuck was saying. What could Republic actually produce for data without modifying their whole system? And one thing, as a landfill customer, I know when you drive in there, they weigh your vehicle, they weigh it on the way back out. It all goes on the invoice that goes to the particular customer. So they actually have a weight for every truck that comes and goes from that, which is going into a database somewhere. So I don't think it takes that might be a better way than asking them to sort of like match up vehicle profiles like Nancy's chart with what comes in and goes, which class of vehicle. It might be easier just to give a tonnage for different vehicles and sort the data by tonnage classes.
Yes.
That's all.
Well, I think we're all kind of in agreement that the data exists, and it probably exists already. The question is, how do we get it? And so one way of getting it is requesting and seeing if it's forthcoming. I don't know if that data already exists somewhere, Daniel, but I'm assuming it doesn't. I guess what I'm looking for is I'm just looking for, can we make a motion to have somebody take charge of accepting the comments about the annual report from people and compiling that into a document. So we don't have to actually have that be compiled. We could all just send our comments about what's in the annual report so that Daniel will attach that to the annual report and present it on October 18th. Is there some other motion or something else that people want to do? For example, do we want to actually have Daniel make a request that Republic update its method and include the stuff which is described in Nancy's memo that we've talked about? Those, like I said, those two things aren't exclusive. But I think the important thing, the thing that's going to get results, is to get these comments attached to the annual report. And I'm anxious to move on, because it seems like we kind of know what we want. Mark?
So I was just going to suggest that, Daniel, I think, has heard the dialogue that we've had and has received the written comments from others, myself and others included, in terms of more detailed information that's necessary. Sounds like they're prepared, staff is prepared to go to the Board of Commissioners on October 18th to say, here's what we want out of the annual report. I don't know if it's possible, Daniel, for you to send something in advance to SWAC/DSAC at our September meeting to say, here's what we're going to be reporting or requesting. And then as part of that process, we focus what it is that we want in terms of refinements or improvements to the Republic Services and the PRC annual report. It seems like we're all in agreement with regard to what additional information we would like. It's probably not a significant level of effort for Republic Services to provide that information. It seems like the franchise agreement gives the Board of Commissioners the authority to require this additional information. So let's just articulate it and make it a request. And I don't know if that needs to happen as a motion. I guess I'll look to Daniel to see if he needs additional direction in order for, as staff to the committee, to be able to do the work. But we'll go from there.
Okay. Before we go to you, Daniel, Marge, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Daniel, what do you say?
Yeah, so I guess my first piece is, I think, a motion regarding sort of the overall path forward that DSAC would like to see is really helpful. So I'm not sure, did the group already make a motion whether or not to accept or not accept the report? Did I hear that earlier? Okay. So I think providing a general motion would be helpful. So for instance, if you're hoping to essentially recommend that the board not accept the report and you provide reasons, I think that could be a really helpful way and sort of a path forward for the board to sort of digest this information, as opposed to just attaching comments to a staff report to the Board of Commissioners. I think we can do that in addition to, we can certainly attach comments for the breadth of that discussion that we're having right now. But I think a motion would really clarify what the group would like to see the Board of Commissioners take action on, I guess. So if possible, sort of clarify the motion and yeah, just make it clear what you'd like to see from the Board of Commissioners.
Okay. So we kind of have two different things going on, and so I think that's kind of what's muddying the water somewhat regarding this annual report. On the one hand, we have kind of the discrepancies in the data, which I'm, as you can tell, I'm a little incensed about, essentially, because I think there's some misdirection going on. It seems to be artificially establishing a number, that the landfill will close 18 years in the future. When you look at the data, it's going to close sooner than that. So that is, a reason why I don't think that, I cannot vote to accept this annual report. What Nancy has brought forward is really more information that could be in the annual report and really should be in the annual report, because it provides a lot of information for the reasons we've discussed. Now, that isn't some reason for us to deny the annual report. We don't fault Republic for not having this information when we haven't given them a chance to include it. So I think there's kind of these two things going on, and that's kind of muddying the waters as to what we want to do. And so, yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, so I guess thanks for clarifying that. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think sort of a direction on the existing annual report, I think would be really helpful in the form of an emotion. And then the following sort of question as to what should be included in future annual reports and what data should be collected. That recommendation maybe could be another motion, or even for that can be covered in a future meeting if you're not worried about it being sort of brought up on the 18th. But certainly, I think two motions, kind of keeping them separated. I think you had a good point there, Chair. I think that could be really effective.
Okay. So I'm calling for a motion essentially on the first item, which is indeed discrepancies in the annual report, specifically in the section talking about the capacity of the annual report, which what is in the annual report, for reasons which I can, enumerate. I don't think that reflects the reality of what is actually going on at the landfill. And of course, it's a very important number. And so for it not to be representative, if there's uncertainty, it's not even representative of that uncertainty. So that is essentially what I'm looking for a motion for, that we do indeed attach some language to it saying, we deny this annual report because it does, it's short on facts in a very important area. So I'm looking for a motion on that.
So I think that I can go ahead and attempt to try to articulate a motion.
Thank you, Mark.
I would suggest that we move that Republic Services had submitted the 2021 annual report to the Disposal Site Advisory Committee, and that we find that the 2021 annual report contains some discrepancies with regard to data that's been submitted as part of the report. And as such, we do not accept the report as presented, and further request that the Board of Commissioners consider making revisions to the data that is submitted as part of this report for future annual reports beginning in 2022.
Okay,
Can it be made specific to discrepancies related to volume and capacity?
Well, so
Or
from
is there,
Robert's Rules of Order perspective, Debbie, you might want to second the motion, and then we can have some discussion and some proposals for amending the motion, and I am certainly open to that. But maybe first we could have a
yes.
second if you want, and then we can move forward.
okay, I'll back
So
up.
I'm sorry, I'm falling down my jobs as chair. I'm to
That's
ask for a
okay, no
second.
problem, no problem.
But it's quite all right, Debbie, but I should have just spoken up very quickly and said, is there a second to this motion?
Oh, I'll second it.
Okay, so we do have a second from Marge. Okay, now let's discuss the motion and possible amendments. So Debbie is saying make the motion. I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak for you, Debbie. You're right here.
No, it'd be great. You'd do better. I just wondered if we could narrow it down why we're not accepting it the way, what particular problems that you'd like them to correct, or what would make it acceptable? What do we need to make it acceptable?
Yes, Daniel.
I just had one suggestion. Mark, I believe you said that DSAC does not accept the report as written, and I guess I would recommend that you change the wording to recommend that the Board of Commissioners don't accept the report as reported. I don't want to change the intention of your motion, but I think that might be what would be most effective here.
And I'm happy with that amendment. I'd like to get to Debbie's comment as well with regard
Yes.
to specific modifications, and certainly the discussion of capacity and consistency of numbers. I know that in our discussion last month, there were a whole number of issues, how the capacity changed from year to year, how the remaining volume changed from year to year. It was so, I have to say, so confusing to me that I was a little befuddled by it depends on how much the compression happened over last year and this year, and there were so many things. I'm not sure how we put our arms around that with regard to how the report could be specifically modified to make it acceptable.
So Daniel, can I ask you, I think we have the intention, right? We know that there are discrepancies. And so now we're trying to figure out how do we identify those discrepancies? And so can the motion just say as detailed in some of the, something like that for a document which someone will produce later?
Yeah, I think there are a couple options. I'm happy to use the feedback that we're getting in this discussion and summarize that. You can also have a single DSAC person send me that list if you want, but I have a good understanding of the why here.
Okay, so you can actually produce the first draft of that document.
Yeah, it would essentially be my drafted staff report for the operation and capacity reports, essentially to the Board of Commissioners, and there I'm going to be detailing the recommendation from DSAC, and I think that's essentially where I'd be putting this and adding any appendix if needed for any supplemental information that you'd like to be sharing.
Okay, so how do we review? We as a body or a designated individual, how do we review that to make sure that what we wanted to include is included?
Yeah, so I suggest scheduling a 10-minute DSAC meeting ahead of the next SWAC meeting to review whatever draft we have, but I should have a draft by that next month's meeting. Because we have to submit this to the Board of Commissioners a couple weeks ahead of time. So I think that'll be a fair opportunity to have the basically have the group weigh in and provide sort of final guidance. Also, during Board of Commissioners meetings, the chair typically has an opportunity to provide any specific feedback to the Board of Commissioners, but obviously I know that's another meeting and another kind of scheduling. So I'd like to summarize it as much as possible for you.
Right. So I would like not to have another DSAC meeting. So I would prefer, I think that all we need is to have somebody's, some committee members' eyes on that process, because I do have a lot of faith in you, but I would like to do a review. So can we do something like that so we don't have to convene yet another DSAC meeting and put off SWAC business even further?
Sure. I think just for public meeting law's sake, I think if we work on it, Chair Eklund and myself basically collaborate on that, make sure that it's capturing DSAC's intent without involving the group offline. I think that would be the best approach. Essentially, treat it like we treat creating agendas between meetings, where I send the draft to Chair Eklund. Chair Eklund says, this works or this doesn't work, here's the feedback, and we move forward on that piece.
Okay, great. So Joel, you've been patient.
Yeah, I was going to say this. Some of this is duplicating our earlier concern about what was missing from the minutes, and I was just going to suggest that when we write our comments for revisions to the minutes to fill in the missing discussion on the problems in the report, we can write that in a form and send it to you, Daniel, I guess as a public comment that will spell out what the problems are in the report, and that should translate pretty easily into the type of document you need.
Okay.
And I would. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to suggest, as long as we are recognizing the comments that Nancy is making relative to some of the additional detail with regard to vehicles and types of vehicles and all that sort of stuff.
That's coming as a separate motion.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So Chuck.
So we can move to amend the motion now to include an exhibit compiled by staff for review by chair.
Yes.
So if that's agreeable, I moved.
Well, that's fine by me as the maker of the motion, and hopefully Debbie as the seconder of the motion.
Okay. So, Mark, would you do your utmost to restate your motion?
That is not at all possible.
I sure hope that you can do it, because I sure couldn't.
No, I think we will have to rely on the recorded version of that, because that was a really long motion, and there's no way that's coming out of my mouth again. But I am agreeable to the amendment of the emotion of the motion. It also might be emotional, but of the motion as proposed by Chuck, and hopefully seconded by Debbie, and hopefully Linda and Daniel. We obviously have the recorded version of the motion. I couldn't possibly restate that motion at this point.
Right. So this is the point in which we call upon Linda to read us back? No, we do not do that.
No, we will not.
Sorry, Linda, we're not going to do that. So, okay, so we have that amended motion as discussed here, which we all agree we cannot enumerate, but which is encapsulated in the remarks that have come up to this point so far. So Debbie, are we ready to vote on this motion? I'm the worst chair ever. Okay. All right. Any more discussion on the motion? Are we ready to move to a vote? So all in favor of the motion, the mystery motion, please raise your hands. Okay, it's unanimous, Linda. The mystery motion carries. Excellent. So that's the first one. So now the second one has to do, I'm looking for a motion. So yeah, Chuck, go ahead.
Just as a parliamentary procedure, the second one passed, we should vote the first one down. The
I'm sorry?
the amended motion stands, we passed, but usually parliamentary procedure is to go back to the original motion and vote it down.
Sorry to say, Chuck, but I'm not sure that I agree with you on that. I think that the parliamentary procedure is such that as long as the motioner and the seconder agree to the amendments, there's no need to take action on the first motion because it has been amended and agreed to by the person who made the motion and the person who seconded the motion. So I think that first motion is dead by virtue of amendment.
I yield, Mr. Yeager.
Thank you, Chuck. And I'm glad to have this discussion because you guys know parliamentary procedure. Like I said, I'm the worst chair ever. So now I'm looking for a second motion having to do with, specifically the matters about transportation data, which, as we've noted, kind of has utility in a number of areas in terms of getting a better handle on kind of what's going on with the landfill. What size trucks, how much traffic, there are a number of questions taking place, and we know that data is acquired, and so really it's just a question of having the Board of Commissioners require that from Republic to include in future annual reports. So anyway, that's the matter at hand as I understand it, and so I'm looking for a motion regarding that. Yeah, Chuck.
I move that we look at class of vehicles and type of lading that is being transported in and out of Coffin Butte to be reflected in the annual report.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. So Marcus seconded Chuck's motion. So discussion, possible amendments. Sorry, Daniel, you go first.
Well, my only feedback is to incorporate recommend to the Board of Commissioners somewhere in there.
Freudian slip, so included, Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Chuck. And is that okay with you? We need to check with the seconder as well, I believe.
Seconder is in the seconder of the motion is in agreement.
Okay, very good. I feel like such a chairman. So further discussion about other amendments to the motion? Yeah, Chuck. I mean, Joel.
Yeah, we didn't address a couple other things in Nancy's comments about including vehicles coming and going from the PRC, which is included in the annual report. I mean, the PR is covered by the annual report. So I would amend Chuck's motion to include the same information for vehicles coming and going from the PRC and for leachate hauling.
I'll second, Chair.
Okay. So, and okay with you, Mark?
Absolutely.
To modify that? Okay. Any other discussion or modifications? With this modifying motions thing, this is really working for me.
It gets complicated. Can get
Well,
complicated.
yes, but it gets me over the fear of the blank page of a motion, I think. To know you can fix it, on the fly.
Yes,
I'm sorry,
absolutely.
I'm rambling. So do we have other discussion about this? Are we ready to vote? I see no other discussion. So Chuck, are you willing to restate your motion, or are you also going to just rely on the record?
Just rely on the record.
Good man. Good man. Sorry, Linda. All right. Shall we vote? All in favor of Chuck's motion, please signify by raising your hands. And it is unanimous, Linda. So the motion carries.
Can I just add to that, that we should add Joel's comments about the PRC to Chuck's motion, just so that it's clear,
Oh, okay. Yes.
just a remark.
Okay.
I captured that in the minutes.
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good. Thank you, Linda. Joel.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think if we're doing this according to proper procedure, what you would say is, we vote on Chuck's amendment as amended by Joel. All in favor, say aye.
Okay.
But we don't have to do it again.
Yes, indeed. Because Linda's right there with us. Thank you, Linda. All right. So thank you very much. Now, again, I think this is just a very important thing for kind of us to establish, right? To really be looking for a little more information, and especially I'm thinking about, how important it is, considering that there is the trash talk work group being convened, that we begin to recognize, I know one of the goals of that work group is common understandings. And so we really want to have some common understandings about what the capacity of the landfill is, and also what the what the traffic situation of the landfill is. I mean, those are all good things to consider about that. So here we are at 8 o'clock, 2 hours in, and what have we arrived at? Break time. So, oh, good heavens. So everyone, let's take a 5-minute break. So let's reconvene at 8:05. So Debbie Guile, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's kind of warm around here because our heat pump failed, but it's
Oh,
within, yeah, it's, we get it replaced. It's under warranty, but who knows how many weeks it'll be because of supply chain stuff. But, you know, we live in Corvallis and this part of the summer, it's cooled off every night. So,
yeah. Well, that is indeed distressing. It is interesting. We kind of moved into this world where now it's like supply chain, who
yeah,
knows? Yeah.
yeah.
I just ran around and opened all the windows in our house during the break because we've only got one little window air conditioner. So
And I'm out at the coast, so it's like 58 degrees, so it's perfect.
Oh, sure, Mark.
I was
Rub it
going to say
in.
that looks like the Edgewater.
No, good for you. Good for you.
We're on the coast.
I'm in Walport.
Ah,
So, and I'll just take this moment before we reconvene to just shout out to the members of the public who are following along through this roller coaster ride of uh, parliamentary procedure around landfills. So we appreciate you tuning in. So shall we reconvene, and thank you all for still being here. So the next item on the agenda is furthering our discussions about independent landfill data verification. So, and again, this, to me, this has direct relevance, again, to Joel and Marge and the Trash Talk work group, looking for common understandings. It just seems like there are big gaps in the data. There's data which we can't necessarily rely on. And as Paul Neatfeld brought up earlier, there's data that can be acquired, regarding methane, which is a big issue. I forgot entirely, not looking at my own notes, that one of the things I wanted to note about the annual report is that the word methane does not appear in it anywhere. So, it is a big issue for the county and everything like that, and it's not included in the annual report. So, I guess I just, Joel, go ahead, please.
Oh, I had the impression that Mark wanted to talk about an actual audit of trucks coming into the landfill as sort of the main reason we're having this discussion, in addition to these other issues
I think that's next on the
about
agenda.
the numbers. So, okay, I'm mixed up on.
Yes. So last meeting, as I recall, we had kind of mashed those two things together, and so I decided to separate them out. So there are other, there's other testing that we can do. So this would be, independent verification of data which may actually exist, but which we would just like to have independently verified. So like a LiDAR survey of the landfill, for example. Right now, that's a number essentially that's a consultant that Republic hires, they do their job, and then Republic reports it to us. The question is, do we want to have independent verification, as an example? So check, yes.
yes, the LiDAR information, if you look at the geotechnical report, they received last year's LiDAR information and they brought it into AutoCAD Civil to make the adjustments. So the LiDAR is been stepped off by those professional engineers. And that gives credence then to a little bit about that report, geo report, is maybe being the baseline of what is actually out there instead of the annual report. And then so that's what I'm stressing for, to see if that is credible. And I would appreciate if everybody could take a look at it to say, yes, that is credible for this baseline.
So, okay. I guess that I would say, as a member of the public, I mean, I can look at the page, I can look at the data, I can look at the stamp, for example. But of course, if there was something wrong with that, I wouldn't know. I mean, there's no way that I could identify that, whereas if somebody else does a LiDAR report and they stamp it, and then we have two of them, and there's a difference between the two, we can kind of begin a discussion about, well, what is that difference? Why is this one different from that one? What parameters, et cetera. So, I mean, that's kind of the idea behind independent verification of data, is to essentially have some other source, not necessarily, being paid by the franchisee, to deliver data. And I'm not saying that we should do that with LiDAR. I'm just bringing that up as an example. So yeah, Chuck.
Okay, let me try not to get too technical, but LiDAR is light emitting radar. What it is really used for surveying. In other words, it shoots down points and then brings them back up, and that gives you your elevations up and down. Okay, that's a pretty common practice throughout the industry for surveying. So if that's usually done by not the geoengineers, but a surveyor who does LiDAR, then they take that information and put it into the AutoCAD. So what I'm saying is if you wanted a third party, they could use that LiDAR that was produced and bring it into their AutoCAD and verify it, and it should be the same. Okay, if both of them stamp them off, so the baseline should be the same there. Okay, unless it was skewed in an error where the third party could find the error and say, okay, here's the error.
Right. So again, LiDAR may be a very bad example for kind of what we're talking about, because that is indeed just a straight measurement. But of course, that LiDAR is used essentially in a program to calculate a certain amount of airspace. And so it's kind of those calculations which are most suspect. But let's forget about LiDAR for the moment, and let's just talk about the issue which is really on the table, and that is indeed methane detection. So that would be, it's a little bit different because it's not verifying any data. Well, it is verifying data. Right now there is an estimate as to what methane is. This would actually be a measurement about what the methane is. So yes, Chuck.
Let me see if I can understand this. If we look at 1 ton of garbage, that really equates to 60 gallons of methane. That's on the EPA page. They break it down to, as a standard ton of garbage, you can get 60 gallons of fuel or X amount of electricity in it. So what I'm saying is then that if the methane is really what is natural gas coming out of the ground, and there's traces in natural gas depending on deposit elements, but methane is really equated to almost natural gas. So what I'm saying is that what am I saying? Is if you take the million, let's say in theory, if you bring in 1 million tons of garbage, that should equal over time when it decomposes 60,000 gallons of methane. The problem is it's encapsulated and wells going down there and then extracted at a rate. So it's going to take a real good scientist to say the third party capturing that methane is equal to this amount of methane. Now, but you've got 40 years of garbage out there. I guess is what I'm trying to say is it's one thing to bring a camera out and look and see if there's methane escaping. It's another thing to say how much methane's under the ground. I guess is what I'm getting at. So if we want to check for methane escaping out of it, that's one procedure versus calculating methane. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. So already there are calculations which are done, estimating how much methane landfills generate. So the EPA has, and this is part of the record for the landfill. But of course that figure varies a lot, because not all of the stuff that can be converted to methane is converted to methane. It has to do with anaerobic, digestion of materials, et cetera. So like you said, the rates vary, et cetera. So there's data that exists, but that data has been basically underestimating the amount of methane leakage, kind of right along. And, based upon the more sophisticated the materials or the testing methods are for looking at how much methane is actually generated by landfills. And so Paul talked about that in his testimony about, because they did a lot of surveying of landfills in California. And so they were looking at how much methane is actually escaping. And there are methane reclamation systems, how effective are those? All of these subjects are very complex. But what he's bringing forward is there are indeed ways of actually looking at the landfill and seeing how much methane is escaping from it, into the atmosphere as a snapshot. And so that is the sort of testing which has never been done on Coffin Butte. And so his recommendation to us is that we recommend to the Board of Commissioners, as part of the data gathering for the Trash Talk work group, let's actually get a fingerprint from Coffin Butte itself about what its methane leakage is. Yeah, Chuck.
Okay, Teledyne FLIR makes cameras that look at industries. I think they can do that from space too, as well as cameras, mobile cameras to go out there to look at the landmass to see what methane is escaping. So there, so there is a technology Teledyne makes for videoing that. I just want to make sure we got the right technology here looking at it for us, so we can say yes, we would make this recommendation and not use LiDAR, but use Teledyne that can measure the gas.
Can we up level this a little bit so that we're talking about, more general, and get the meeting going, moving?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm old and I'm getting older every minute.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
I do that. So Daniel.
So I had one piece of relevant information that might be helpful for the discussion. I'm not sure if anybody has looked into some of the new Oregon rules around regulating landfill gas emissions. There is a new OAR, just pulling it up here, Chapter 340, Division 239, but it's on our materials management library. under a section called landfill gas emissions. But essentially, this rule is pretty new. It requires pretty rigorous in kind of increase in rigor requirements for landfills to do certain methods around regulating landfill gas emissions, and it might just come into play with this emissions conversation in general. But as I understand it, it looks like there's some sort of report due in October to the state from the landfill that pertains specifically to these new rules, and that report might have some helpful information or even sort of overlap in the requests that is being discussed today. So I just wanted to point that out, and maybe we might even be able to have an opportunity to get some more information from DEQ about it, and maybe the landfill operator, and see, you know, what goes into that, what changes when that new state rule goes into effect.
Okay, so I think I have some information about that because I think I've looked at that rule. Certainly, I looked at some legislation that had to do with landfill emissions, but those regulations essentially brought smaller landfills under the same umbrella of reporting that larger landfills are currently under. That was the only effect that it was having, you know, in the short term, so this year. And so that doesn't affect Coffin Butte really, because it's already a big landfill. And so it's already holding to those rules. So without having seen that, you know, specifically what you're talking about, Daniel, it might be something which I'm unfamiliar with. But if it is what I think it is, there is no new testing methodology that's associated with that, which is what we're talking about right now. So Debbie, I think you had, did you? No? Okay. So yes, so we want to move on here and get out of the weeds, certainly, and not talk about exactly what cameras were going to be used. We just want to know whether or not we want to recommend further testing. So we have an action item from a member of the public, you know, bringing information to light about testing that essentially the Board of Commissioners could, you know, authorize immediately, which would be to get essentially an estimate about the actual leakage from Coffin Butte landfill that could be activated. The satellites fly over basically all the time. So that is kind of the action item, I think, that's sitting in front of us. So do we have, Joel, please?
Yeah, would I be correct in summarizing what you're saying is that what we're looking for, or thinking about recommending to the commissioners, is that besides the surface-based monitoring, which is mandated by Oregon OER or whatever, we're looking for something that is actually an aerial or satellite monitoring method that would actually get a snapshot of what's being emitted that wouldn't necessarily be picked up on a ground survey. Is that right, what we're talking about?
That is what we're talking about. That's what Paul described.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's,
Chuck.
I just skimmed through the monitoring section of that rule, and it doesn't call for anything like that. So this would be outside of what OER is talking about.
Okay, thank you for doing that research. Yeah, Chuck.
But that being said, sustainability in Benton County recognizes methane gases and the reduction of it. And one of the biggest ones are generally landfills. So within that harmony, there may be a looking at it from a satellite, taking a picture to say this is the appearance of the escaping gases from the landfill.
Exactly. Yes, Mark.
I guess I would just raise the question or the specter of, so DEQ issues a Title V, I guess, permit. That's an air quality permit that they issue to the landfill, which I'm not familiar with. I think I've downloaded and printed it at some place, but I'm not a air quality person at all. Do we know whether or not any new legislation or rulemaking at the state level has impacted what is required of landfills with regard to air quality? Because I'm not familiar with that, but I've heard anecdotally from a few people that landfills are coming under increased review with regard to their air quality impacts. And so just raising that for the group.
Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're really looking at here is, lining up with what the commissioners have now stated as a priority for climate resilience, or whatever it's called, that we're looking at the climate impacts of the landfill gases. So not strictly an air quality. These surface measurements are aimed at getting local measurements of what might be a hazard for someone walking around on the job site or nearby. But if you want to look at the climate impacts, you're looking for the big picture measurement of what's actually coming out of the landfill from all points, and that's not measured by the ground survey. So if we make a recommendation, I think what we're going to do is say that recommend to the commissioners that in view of their interest in landfill or in methane as a sustainability initiative, that we recommend that there should be an effort to obtain satellite data that would actually give a measure of total methane escaping from Coffin Butte landfill, rather than just air quality measurements.
Yes, that summarizes exactly kind of what Paul said, and kind of what I am latching on to, which is this is really an informational thing. I mean, I've looked at the data from surveys of California landfills, and basically those landfills have a fingerprint. Some of them release very little methane. Others release like 6 times what the EPA was estimated that they should be releasing. So it's a factor having to do with how wet is the landfill, how is the landfill run, how leaky is it. There are all sorts of factors that go into it. And essentially those factors can only kind of be appreciated when you begin to actually look at what is coming off the landfill, rather than theoretical or kind of other sorts of calculations. And so that is a data point which the Board of Commissioners has said is an important item for them. They specifically identified the methane emissions from the landfill. So this would be essentially us giving the Board of Commissioners some information about how they could move forward with an item which they stated is a priority of theirs. So I think it's very timely, and it should be seen in that regard. We don't really know right now what litigation or what sort of regulation might result from it, but it's an informational point at this point in time for the Board of Commissioners, and also for the Trash Talk work group, as they proceed with their deliberations. Yeah, Chuck.
The trash talk point is good because it will also have representation from DEQ there that could also give some insight to that too.
So I'm looking for a motion, whether for us to recommend a course of action for the Board of Commissioners. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I move that we recommend for the Board of Commissioners seek to obtain aerial or satellite measurements of total methane emissions from the landfill, independent of the ground-based measurements, as part of their goal of for investigating methane as a resilient community priority.
Do I hear a second? So Marge, I saw you first. So Marge seconds. So discussion about this motion? I'll just say I thought that was very well put, Joel. Thank you.
Actually wrote it ahead of time.
You are such a smart guy. Why didn't we think of that? Oh, okay. I'm sorry, any other discussion? I'm getting a little giddy here. I'm not seeing any. So shall we vote? All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. It is unanimous. So unanimous there, Linda. Thank you very much. So for taking action on that, I think it's a very important item. Okay. There's other landfill verification that we could talk about, but we're not going to talk about today. So let's move on to the audit on landfill waste, which Mark recommends. Mark, do you want to open up the discussion about this?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chair. So the key for me is that there are a lot of items, both in terms of the Oregon administrative rules as well as the franchise agreement that prohibit the disposal of both hazardous materials and other materials that are prohibited from being discharged into a landfill. That would be electronics and some other items. And independently, we know that those items are in fact making their way into Coffin Butte landfill. Coffin Butte through Republic Services and their garbage hauling franchises, as well as other independent garbage hauling, if you will, franchises or other independent garbage hauling agents are bringing materials to the landfill that I suspect are likely containing hazardous materials, such as fluorescent tubes, e-waste that is prohibited from being discharged. So that would be monitors, TVs, all those sorts of things. We know for a fact that those things are happening here in Corvallis. Republic Services claims that, in fact, they are not accepting anything but municipal waste, which does not include any of those prohibited materials. So the thing that I'm trying to bring forward to the group is I think it's time to have an independent assessment or an audit of what exactly is going into the landfill by hiring someone as a third party to, in fact, inspect loads that are coming. I mean, we have loads coming from 22 or 23 counties around the state. I cannot imagine that those people are not just accepting any waste that comes to their garbage trash bins. Here I am here in Lincoln County, and Dahl Disposal, who is our garbage waste hauler. There's no effort to assess what actually gets thrown into the garbage trucks. So it seems important to me that we have a better understanding of what in fact is going into the landfill. And part of that process is doing a random, independent, third-party audit of the material that's being carried into the landfill and becomes a long-term obligation for the citizens of Benton County. That's my pitch.
Yeah. Chuck.
Assistant Chair makes a really good recommendation there. I think it also behooves us to expand it somewhat in looking at recyclables as well. the percentages of wood, plastics, and other items there to see if we have a good cross sections coming in, that they are recycling correctly, that they're not putting good recycling in with their garbage. And plus it gives really an indication of the true percentages of materials going into the garbage, where we can look at the footprints from EPA to say, here's the cross section, we exceed that, or we're above and below it. So we got a baseline with EPA saying, here's the percentage of everything that should be coming out of the garbage, and we have that representation. And indeed, hazmat is in there too. Some hazmats are acceptable, others are not.
So yeah, I just wanted, to put forward, just emphasize a little bit more kind of what's at stake, right? Because the more hazardous materials that go into that landfill, the more it becomes, potentially a very serious problem for the county down the road. When, as a matter of fact, a liner splits and those materials start to make it back out in, make it into groundwater or whatever. I mean, the regulations, of course, saying don't landfill these items all have a very strong reason as to why these items should not be landfilled. So I just want to say there's kind of a lot at stake, and again, this is kind of a a verification, right? Theoretically, there's a very low amount or no amount of these materials going in, but we don't really know that, and there's not a lot of reason for Republic to make it hard for people to throw away garbage. So I think it is very appropriate, essentially, to have the county look out for its own interests by having an independent audit. So do we have more?
And I would just like to say that,
yeah,
I guess I would just like to say that I appreciate Chuck's comments, in that I hadn't really been focusing on wastes that might not be hazardous, that should not be going to the landfill because they're otherwise recyclable or have other ways to be repurposed. So I appreciate that comment. We definitely have evidence of institutional discharges of these types of hazardous materials into dumpsters, and Republic Services in Corvallis is not attempting to do any enforcement of the prohibition of these types of materials being put into dumpsters. And so that's really what prompted my interest in this issue, because if it's happening here, and if it's happening in and from public institutions, it seems like it's probably happening. It's much more prevalent than we may know or acknowledge.
Yeah, I'll also second that. Chuck, I think that's a very worthy addition to this motion, because if, for example, we find out that we receive landfill, let's say we receive garbage from Tillamook County, and it's like 3/4 compostable material. If that material will only come, I'm sorry.
Good.
Yeah.
Good
Yes.
Tillamook cheese.
Yes, it's a cheese that's past its expiration date, come from Tillamook or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of that can be, if it's like material that should be composted, when you put it into a landfill, it turns into methane. And so, we kind of have really increased the harm of that. When knowing that data, essentially Benton County can talk to Tillamook County and go, hey, you need to get on your composting program. You need to have one. So it really opens up a lot of avenues, I think, in that regard. Yeah, Chuck.
Not only that, but remember the circle economy that we were talking about there, that is mandated by the state and the counties to reduce refuse going into the landfill. So how can you declare what should be reduced unless you first identify what the categories of refuse are going in there?
Yep, very good point. Is there any more discussion? Are we ready to entertain a motion? Yeah, Joel, you're hesitantly raising your hand.
Yeah, I almost hesitate to bring this up, but I think, just to dramatize what this is about, a lot of our waste is coming from apartments up in Washington County, and we just had an incident where our landfill made the national news because something came in a truck, and my information is that it was transported all the way to the landfill. There was a police tip that there was something in that truckload. A team showed up in Tyvek to search the truck as they were unloading, and that way it was found. But that must happen. Not, we're worried about hazardous materials and looking at what other things in the waste stream don't belong there. But it just really highlights how this can happen, because you just have a truck that grabs a department dumpster, it dumps it over the top into the back of the truck, they drive down here, and no one's looking at these loads. So it's very much needed.
Yeah, I appreciate your sensitivity in describing that scenario, Joel. Yes, Daniel.
Yeah, I just, in case it's relevant, so DEQ does a waste characterization study every 6 years as part of like a statewide effort. And some counties essentially ask to be included as a more specific county sampling for this larger statewide effort, and essentially have a county waste characterization study that's statistically significant to be used for things like materials management planning and things like that. Those samples include taking a look at the entire load from various different sources, not just for hazardous materials. 2022 is essentially slated to be like the next waste characterization study opportunity from DEQ. We connected with them a couple years ago about this, sort of planning ahead. We brought it to SWAC to essentially get a recommendation on, what SWAC thinks we should do moving forward. Essentially, DEQ quoted us that it would cost about $70,000 to have a statistically significant sampling for Benton County. This is a one-time kind of event as opposed to an ongoing, random sampling that continues for years and years. But that's sort of the background. SWAC essentially recommended that we don't pursue that in favor of using money elsewhere. But that's sort of the background. That's something that the state does. And I believe will be included on a small part of sampling so that they're essentially getting a statistical significance statewide. So I think last time we were included in like 20 samples. So they provide a little bit of data for free, but not anything that we'd be able to look at Benton County and say, here's a statistically significant representation of what type of waste goes in 2022. So that's the background. I'm not sure if being included on that is still an option, but certainly something that might be food for thought here.
Yeah, Chuck.
That is a good option if it's a timely function to get good statistical data. What I'm trying to say is the relevancy here is also kind of need to know what's going into that, because we may be expanding one of these days, or using another technology to dispose of the matter. So I'm, even though it's 70,000, realize that, but it's really relevant to find out what the percentages are really going into there. Again, back to the sustainability of it, of saying, how are we going to reduce refuse going into the garbage if you don't know what's going into it?
Right. So there's a lot of information that we don't have about, you know, what an independent third-party audit would look like versus what DEQ is offering, you know, for this matter, you know, and how they would compare cost-wise or whatever. But it occurs to me that we don't really need to parse that out. You know, I think that we can let the Board of Commissioners, or we can essentially request, you know, the first step might be essentially to explore those options and decide on which one should be done. I think the subject for us tonight, because we don't have the information about how those things compare, you know, the action item for us is just to say, we really think that this should be done one way or the other. So I'm looking for a motion.
So before we have a motion, I guess I would like to say that, you know, it's not about what's coming in from Benton County. We know that what goes into the landfill is from Benton County is anywhere from 6 to 11%. You choose the number. It's a very small percentage of what's going into the landfill. And what happens in Benton County may not reflect what's happening in other counties that are bringing waste to the landfill. So, it really is trying to get a better handle on what is the nature of the waste that's being brought to the landfill. Again, I'm concerned that there's less and less control over the amount of the types of materials that are being put into people's trash bins that are making their way to the landfill. So I'll make a motion that we ask the Board of Commissioners to fund a study to conduct a long-term third-party independent audit of materials that are being discharged into the landfill. And I will add to that a random independent third-party audit of materials that are being brought into the landfill in order to characterize the nature of the wastes that are being brought to the landfill, both in terms of hazardous materials as well as otherwise purposeful materials such as recycled materials or compostable materials that could be otherwise directed and reduce the impact and load on the landfill.
Well said, Mark. Do I hear a second? Joel will second. Thank you, Joel. Discussion? Any further? Yeah, Debbie.
How is long-term defined?
Thanks for that question, Debbie. I'm thinking over the course of maybe a year or 18 months, you know, not decades, but something that is, I don't think it should be done in a one time only. So maybe it'd be a 2 or 3 times over the course of 6 to 12 months, just so that we understand the variability, the potential variability of the waste that might be coming to the landfill.
So several samples over a time period of a year to a year and a half is what you're thinking.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, just
not just one picture in time. Okay.
yeah, no, it's not like 10 or 20 years, but it's something that's near term, but not just a one time only sampling.
Other discussion? I'm not seeing any more. Are we ready to vote? Looks like. All in favor of Mark's motion, please signify by raising your hands. Mark, I think you're frozen on my screen, so did your hand go up? Yes, I thought so. Okay, thank you. So that's unanimous, Linda. So thank you very much for that. So again, I think a very important thing, important data. Okay, we have now got member requests for DSAC. Anyone have any requests of anyone else? I just have a request. Yes, Debbie.
Well, I don't know where to put this because I wanted to ask Republic. And there's big, broad, important things that are talked about here. Sometimes I have little immediate things that I wonder about. So it was open streets, Corvallis, bicycle riding, food vendors. Food vendors had paper plates and paper clamshells, and yet they were not allowed to go into the compost. They had to go into the garbage. So I wanted to ask Republic, the PRC, what's going on? Why, for our own town, when we have outdoor events that especially are put on by sustainability parts of the town, why we couldn't compost it? So I don't know where to put that, but before I forgot, I wanted to mention it. It's a little thing, last week in our town.
Yes. Okay, good. So Daniel, is that a request that you can forward to Ian?
Sure. I think,
You may know.
I think there, sorry, go on, Debbie. Oh,
You
I
may
think
know
there's
the answer. Yeah.
two approaches. One is from the sort of the PRC response to why certain things are not accepted at the PRC, and it's sort of a larger discussion too with other similar composting facilities. And then the other is from Republic as a collector. So I could reach out to Ian and Julie Jackson and sort of get a response from both ends of that to see what's most helpful for the group.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other member requests? So I just had one request of staff, I would like to move to the Zoom platform. So since the Board of Commissioners now do that, I just like it better. So I'll just put in that request. So let's see, agenda items. Do people have agenda items for our next DSAC meeting, which will be in October, unless we have reason to do differently? Yeah, Mark.
I guess just a question of, we haven't heard anything from Daniel or otherwise, this concept of having two separate meetings and DSAC being quarterly and SWAC being, legislation, the rules are very clear that we could have just one meeting. It could be this group meeting monthly. So I'm just curious. We haven't heard any response from Daniel with regard to that discussion from last meeting.
And you got something for us?
No, so I didn't bring anything because I wasn't on the agenda for this item, but I've prepared a memo that I'm prepared to be on a future agenda and we can discuss the options, but certainly it's not a sort of 1 minute item. So I'm happy to bring it to the group for following meeting, but yeah, I've done a fair amount of homework on it, and I'm happy to discuss it in more detail.
Okay, so can you send us that memo as soon as possible?
Sure. I think the best approach will be to include that memo just like we would include any other packet materials ahead of the next meeting. You'll have plenty of opportunity to review it. There won't be, offline discussion about it. So I'll make sure that the group has plenty of time to review it, but certainly it'll be in the form of a packet as opposed to just an email back and forth to the group.
Well, I just have to push back on that. Putting it in the packet means that we have 1 week to review it. So saying that we have plenty of time to review it, which equals 1 week, what I'm asking is if we could have more time than that.
Sure. I guess at this point,
Is there,
no. At this point, I'll include it in the packet, but I'll keep you updated if we have that sort of prepared and ready to go and reviewed with more time, I guess. But I'm happy to look more into it. Also, just kind of keeping in mind how procedurally we do this type of work, and we've sort of adopted this packet system, and it's a very kind of neat and effective way to do this. So I think certainly obviously the sort of timing of materials and packets seems to be a concern for the group. So I think we can also talk about that, like when the packet arrives to the group. I think that might be a more appropriate conversation to address larger concerns than just this one specific item.
yeah, I mean, I would second that, so I mean, the current system basically compresses all our activity into 1 week. And if you don't happen to be available for that week, as a member, you're unable to address all of the stuff which arrives in the packet. So if those things can be moved forward as possible, I mean, I don't really see what exactly the problem would be in releasing a memo which would be in the packet earlier than the packet also to the, to the members. I understand that's not how you're doing it, and I don't want to disrupt the packet procedure, but for me, certainly to receive materials earlier means I don't have all of the work essentially for this compressed into a 1 week period. It's not very efficient in terms
Sure.
of spreading out the, the work obligations of this committee, over allowing me to schedule it,
Yeah, I
So,
definitely understand where you're coming from, and I guess I'm also trying to balance the organization of materials and how to provide people with notice. And there's, I think it's just, I certainly think it applies to more than just this specific item. And I also very much see your point. I don't want to limit everyone's opportunity to review pertinent information, especially when we have long packets. So I hear you, and I'll certainly be looking into what our options are moving forward.
okay. So we're at the agenda items portion of Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple of things. There was one thing that Nancy Whitcomb brought up that we didn't address with our motion, and that was the county of origin question. And I think, so the next time we have a DSAC meeting, I'd like, where Republic is actually present, I'd like to have that on the agenda to ask them what is feasible and what could be done. And second one, I still want to hear about the herons. So I'd like to, since they weren't here for this meeting, I would say let's keep that on the agenda for future meetings when they have a chance to respond as soon as they have the data.
That's good. Do we want to, never mind. Okay, very good. So Heron's item for the next DSAC meeting agenda is good. Anything else? Anybody? All right. Shall we adjourn DSAC and shall we convene SWAC? Let's go ahead and do that now here at 8:59 p.m. Yike.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Oh, that's right. I was just, okay, Debbie, do you have a comment or just, no, you're just voting, right? Yeah. All in favor of adjourning DSAC? Looks unanimous, Linda. Okay, so
Okay.
So now let's convene.
Chair.
So, so we have review approval of the minutes. Do we want to kick the, do we have changes to the SWAC meeting, to the minutes, or do we want to kick that down the road as well? Anyone have any changes to the minutes? Feel that anything's left out? It was a pretty brief meeting last time, wasn't it? I think so. Yeah. Okay. Do I hear a motion for approving the minutes then? Anybody? Okay, Joel.
So moved. So moved.
So moved by Mark. Do I have a second? Debbie. Oh, okay.
Second.
Debbie is seconding. All in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate by raising your hands. Looks unanimous. Okay. So, do we have any community member comments by very patient, long-suffering members of the community? I think not. Okay. If you do have comments, feel free to speak up, but we're moving on. Oh no, Ed, you're logged in. Do you have comments? No. Okay. It's good to see you, Ed. Thanks for sticking in there. Okay. So the Sustainable Materials Management Plan. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's after 9 o'clock and we've been at it for a long time and my brain is kind of mush. It's just that, oh, Joel, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is something maybe Daniel is going to want to comment on this also, but I noticed in the commissioner's memo or the charter for this new trash talk group, whatever it's called, the working group, they specifically are saying now that they expect that we will not undertake any initiatives, either SWAC or DSAC, on issues that will be treated in that working group. And so my understanding is that they're going to be, because the Sustainable Materials Management Plan is part of the mandate of that group, we might be prevented from proceeding on that. I don't know, Daniel, is that your take?
So Daniel?
So I can't, essentially I don't have a lot of feedback on that piece. I think generally it's my understanding that they're essentially hoping for conversations around the charter, I guess the charge of the work group to sort of happen at one table, I think is sort of the language used. And really hoping that folks who like SWAC and DSAC that kind of want to provide feedback on different aspects of the charter do so through their members that are appointed to the group. But I also think that there's sort of the two different kind of scopes where SWAC and DSAC look at things that might not necessarily come into play with the charge of the group. For instance, I think the Sustainable Materials Management Plan discussion is mainly around sort of the process and initially scoping what that might look like, as opposed to details that SWAC might be more interested in with regard to the type of information and content that you'd like to see in a report like that. So I for any other like more detailed response to that, I think I would have to defer to the group facilitator to sort of weigh in on what that functionally looks like for the group. But certainly I think there's room, and I think if there's a direct overlap where it's very specifically the charge of the group and SWAC and DSAC want to have a conversation about that, I think the idea is for the appointed work group members to bring that conversation to the group as well.
Okay. So I have some feedback, I think, relating to that specifically, which is by the schedule which the work group has published, there is a total of 2 hours devoted to actually discussing the Sustainable Materials Management Plan. So there's not much of the Sustainable Materials Management Plan, which I think the work group can claim as their own if they're going to discuss it for 2 hours. So, I think that, like Daniel said, I think the specific charter mentioned, in the work group plan, and we're looking, of course, to our work group members to kind of give us more accurate information about what the work group is going to do as it indeed moves forward. But at least, right now, it looks like the work group is tasked with scoping out the next step to actually making a management plan, which I read as being, who are the consultants that are going to help with it? Who are the consultants that are going to help with it, and kind of what is the charter going to be for those people? So it's going to be very different than, like you said, Daniel, than the sorts of issues that we deal with, where we are looking at what needs to be in that plan and what sort of information do we know about that plan, et cetera. So that would be that's the situation as I see it moving forward regarding the relationship between us, and the work group and the management plan. So Chuck, did you have a comment?
Yes, what I understood, and I'll use their words, they would not opine on the merits, but they want to look at the substance of the process. So I look at the merits really saying is, here's the goals we want, or the tenets, or the guidelines that we want. And the processes is really to take those goals and say, how do we move to those for the process, through the processes. And I do best when I talk garbage is, one of the merits or tenets of sustainability is to reduce waste. So what is so that's mandated. I mean, that's the goal. So we can talk on the merits of what that refuse is or what that goal is, but then they define the processes and the substance to get there. So it doesn't eliminate us, that we still need to look at the merits of stuff, if you will, and then they can enumerate what the processes are, is my understanding.
So I know that we're all tired and would like to wrap this all up. So I think this is great information that you brought forward, Joel. I mean, it's a very real question as to kind of what we want. We certainly want to continue operating in the good graces of the Board of Commissioners. We are their advisors, but it does seem like there's a lot of room essentially for more progress to be made upon, about this Sustainable Materials Management Plan. There certainly are things that we can do. So I think, Daniel, this is the sort of thing that we just would like to charge you with, kind of identifying what it is exactly that, if anything, is prohibited, or discouraged, or whatever the word might be, so that we know for our next meeting. Yeah, Joel, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I first of all, Ken, yeah, you reminded me of a very good point, that there's very limited time the working group is going to devote to this. Specifically, it's half a meeting in early November, after they've spent 3 meetings on the conditional use permit issues. And I was going to suggest that also, just now that we've seen the roster, or most of them are people who have not been party to our discussions for sure. One thing we might consider is asking for the whole SWAC, because it is a public meeting for this working group, to join them for that discussion and be part of it. I would guess there might be some flexibility. So that might be one way we could approach this, by continuing to work on this, but among ourselves, but then go to the working group with our own input, which, you know, Marge and I would be representing us, but I think it would be good for all the group to participate in that particular meeting, and for sure. So that's one idea.
Okay, yeah, I like that idea. So Daniel, can you get back to us with guidance? And again, I'm asking for this to be offline, so that we, this is information that I need to know before we set the agenda for our next meeting, because we need to know exactly how, you know, we need to know the parameters under which we're operating in the next meeting. So if you could determine that, you know, and let us know about that, you know, before it's time for me to set an agenda. Is that possible?
Yeah, certainly. And obviously you and I kind of work together on developing that agenda every month anyways. So at the very least, I'll be able to speak with you about it without conflicting with any public meeting law issues. So I'll work on that and get back to you.
Okay. The only other thing that I want to just mention at this time is I did indeed send a document, you know, having to do with common understandings to all of you earlier today. And so, and really that document is for, you know, you, Marge, and Joel as a compendium kind of the things we've heard. So, you know, it is indeed my understanding of what common excuse me, of what common understandings should be brought up, and you know, questions asked essentially by the work group in laying out that floor that the facilitator has talked about in terms of understanding what is actually going on with the landfill and what the salient issues are. Because that's the first thing that the worker is going to do, according to the schedule and my understanding, is they're going to receive a document from the county, I believe, you know, laying out what those common laying out what those common understandings are, and then responding to that, and, you know, addressing any shortcomings or whatever else. We all know that common understandings about the landfill operations have been very hard to come by. And so, you know, I think that's going to be very important work for the work group. I mean, I'm very excited to see this sort of effort actually going into making those common understandings. So I just wanted to kind of give you a, you know, my brain dump or whatever about what I understood common understanding should be. So yeah, Marge.
Well, I want to say I really appreciate your document, Ken. I think you did a really good job of giving both specifics and a general picture. And actually, that is kind of something I might have thought expected from the county by this time, because that's an action item for the county to produce a document like that.